Welcome to the Ghost Story Grandma channel. Today, Grandma will bring you a mysterious and eerie tale. Get ready for it. Ghost Story, The Forgotten Ones. California, in a small town called Red Pine, about a 3-hour drive from San Francisco. This area was once a gold mining site in the 19th century, but was gradually abandoned after the main mine closed. A few families still lived scattered around, but most of the town had become a forgotten land. Some remaining houses had rotted away, the roads were deserted, and overgrown trees obscured the pathways. Gabe Morton drove into Red Pine on a gloomy afternoon. He had visited a few times as a child, but since leaving, he never returned. 15 years ago, his father disappeared in the forest near the old gold mine. The locals believed it was an accident, but his mother never accepted that. Now Gabe was back, hoping to uncover what really happened. He parked in front of the town's only remaining cafe. The wooden sign on the door was faded, and the window glass had a few scratches. Inside, only 3 customers sat scattered around, most of them elderly. The owner was a middle-aged woman named Marcy, who had known Gabe's family before. She saw him, looking surprised but didn't ask many questions. A young woman sat in the corner of the cafe, flipping through a notebook with deep focus. Her black hair was tied up high, and her sharp features carried a hint of exhaustion. She wore a thin jacket, and a cup of cold coffee rested on the table. Gabe recognized her before he remembered her name, Julia Hartman, a freelance journalist who specialized in investigating mysterious disappearances. She had contacted him months ago, asking about his father and other strange incidents in town. Julia noticed Gabe and gave him a slight nod. He pulled out a chair and sat down, his eyes glancing at her notebook. Messy handwriting, an old map of Red Pine, a few black and white photographs. He asked what she was investigating. Julia slid a photograph toward him. It showed a group of men standing at the entrance of a dark cave. One of them was his father. Julia explained that in the past 50 years, at least 8 people had disappeared in this area. The police found no traces, and the records only listed them as missing under unknown circumstances. Some of the older locals mentioned something connected to the old gold mine, but no one would speak clearly about it. Gabe didn't believe in supernatural stories, but the fact that Julia had found a picture of his father among old documents made him hesitate. She told him there was a man who could help them, someone who had worked in the mine before it closed. He lived in a cabin deep in the forest, about 3 miles from town. They left the cafe when night had already fallen. The road leading into the woods was silent, the wind rustling through the trees in an endless whisper. Gabe's car rolled slowly along the rough path. Ahead, only the dim headlights illuminated dry branches and layers of fallen leaves covering the road. The cabin was hidden behind a row of tall trees, a warm yellow light glowing from a small window. Julia knocked 3 times. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing an old man with unkempt silver hair. His face was deeply lined, and his eyes held a flicker of alarm when he saw them. Julia told him they only wanted to ask a few questions about the old mine. The man remained silent for a long moment before stepping back, leaving the door open. Gabe and Julia stepped inside. The air smelled damp, and the wooden walls were covered with old photographs. Some had faded, while others were partially torn. A map lay on the table, with a particular area near the mine's entrance circled. The old man looked at them, his voice low and grave. If you truly want to know what happened there, don't just search for answers. Make sure you can accept what you will find. The old man pulled out a chair and sat down, his eyes fixed on the map spread across the table. Red circles marked the area near the mine's entrance, the ink bold and deliberate. Gabe glanced at Julia. She said nothing, just watched intently. He said he had worked in the Red Pine mine when he was young, back in the 70s. At the time, many still believed there was plenty of gold left underground, but no one could dig any deeper. Not because of the geology, but because of things that couldn't be explained. Machines frequently broke down, workers got injured for no apparent reason, and some even vanished inside the tunnels. There were sections of the mine that no one touched, yet the rock walls constantly changed shape, as if something inside was shifting. One night in 1983, a group of 6 men snuck into the mine, including Gabe's father. They carried maps, tools, flashlights, and ropes. People said they had discovered a new passage, one that had never been documented. A tunnel that plunged deep into the earth, leading to a place no one had ever set foot in. None of them ever returned. The next morning, police and villagers searched the area. They found only a few scattered belongings, a broken flashlight, some scratches on the rock walls, no signs of life, no bodies. The search went on for a month but yielded nothing. Eventually, the mine entrance was sealed off, and local authorities forbade anyone from going back. The families of the missing men left town, and no one spoke of it again. Gabe clenched his fists, a cold unease creeping up his spine. The old man was speaking about his father like it was just another story, something distant and weightless. But his father wasn't some ghost in a forgotten case file. He had lived, he had existed, and he had vanished here. Julia asked if anyone had ever seen any sign of the missing men. The old man stared at her for a long moment, then stood up and rummaged through an old drawer. When he returned, he held a cracked, leather-bound notebook. He set it on the table and flipped to a faded page. Scrawled handwriting filled the paper. A hunter's account from 1997. He had been passing by the mine on a foggy night when he saw a figure standing at the edge of a rock ledge. Tall and gaunt, dressed in tattered clothes, with long hair hanging over its face. When he called out, the figure turned, but it had no face, just a black void, as if someone had erased its head from existence. Gabe stared at the page, his palms damp with cold sweat. Julia flipped through more entries, similar stories. Over the years, several people had reported seeing shadowy figures around the mine. No one dared get close. No one wanted to find out if they were the missing men. The old man looked at Gabe, his voice lowering. If you want to know what happened to your father, there's only one way. You have to go there. But you must decide for yourself, because once you step inside, there may be no way back. Gabe stood at the entrance of the Red Pine mine. Night had fallen, and the cold wind lashed against his face, making him shiver. Julia pulled her coat tighter, scanning their surroundings. There was no one else, only jagged rocks and the yawning darkness ahead. The flashlight in Gabe's hand trembled slightly as he cast its beam into the tunnel. Stepping inside, the sound of their footsteps echoed sharply. The air was heavy, thick with the damp scent of earth and decay. Wooden beams lined the passage, most of them rotting, some split wide open. Julia checked the map the old man had given them, pointed in a direction, and signaled for them to move forward. The deeper they went, the narrower the space became. Gabe's flashlight swept across the walls, revealing strange carvings. They looked like ancient script, symbols woven together in no discernible pattern. Some drawings depicted human figures, but every face had been scratched out. He reached out to touch one, the stone surface freezing against his fingertips. A strange sensation crawled up his spine, as if someone were watching from the shadows. Julia reached a fork in the tunnel and bent down, picking up an old flashlight. Its aluminum casing was scratched, the battery cap missing. Gabe recognized it. It was the same model his father's group had carried. He tightened his grip around it, his breath heavy. If they had been here, then what had happened to them? As they pressed on, the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. A rickety wooden ladder descended further below. Gabe tested it with his foot. It creaked but seemed sturdy enough. Julia went first, each step groaning under her weight. When they both reached the bottom, darkness enveloped them completely. Their flashlights revealed blackened rock crevices stretching endlessly into the void. A faint sound echoed through the tunnel, a whisper drifting from somewhere unseen. Gabe turned sharply, but there was nothing. Just Julia, frozen in place. She had heard it too. They stood still, listening, their hearts pounding in the silence. Then, suddenly, their flashlights flickered and died. Darkness swallowed them. A chill slithered across Gabe's neck, making him recoil. Julia fumbled in her bag for a backup light, her hands shaking. When she finally clicked it on, its beam illuminated the wall ahead. At its center, something was embedded in the rock, a handprint pressed deep into the stone. The fingers were unnaturally long. It looked fresh, as if someone or something had just left it there. Julia reached out and lightly touched the handprint on the stone. The surface was cool, yet it felt more like flesh than rock. She recoiled as a wave of cold air slithered past her. Gabe took a step back, his eyes locked on the imprint. It looked too real, as if someone had pressed their hand into the stone just moments ago. A faint rustling echoed behind them. Both of them spun around. Gabe's flashlight swept across the cavern's crevices, revealing only shifting shadows. Julia strained to listen, but the sound had vanished. Gabe signaled for them to keep moving. They followed the wall, venturing deeper into the lower levels of the mine. The tunnel narrowed, its jagged walls closing in as if trying to trap them. The air grew frigid, heavy with the scent of damp earth. The slow, rhythmic drip of water echoed through the darkness. Gabe stopped when he spotted a small passageway branching off to the side. He shone his light inside, its dim beam reflecting off rusted metal fragments. A dusty old hard hat lay discarded on the ground. Beside it, a heap of tattered fabric, perhaps once clothing. Julia crouched down and brushed aside the debris. Beneath the thick layer of dust, something gleamed faintly, a tarnished brass nameplate, its engraved letters worn but still legible. She picked it up and turned it over. On the back, a sequence of numbers had been crudely scratched in. It wasn't a date. It wasn't any code she recognized. Gabe took the nameplate, his expression tightening. He dug into his backpack and pulled out his father's old notebook. Flipping quickly through its fragile pages, his eyes froze on a matching sequence of numbers, one of the last entries before his father's team had vanished. Julia rose to her feet, scanning the small chamber. Something felt wrong. It wasn't the handprint, nor the abandoned items. It was the air itself. It was too dense, too oppressive, as if something unseen stood just inches away. A sudden crash erupted from above. Dirt and pebbles rained down from the tunnel ceiling. Gabe yanked Julia back as a chunk of stone plummeted to where she had just been standing. Both of them looked up, but nothing else moved. Then Julia's flashlight flickered, its beam growing faint. Just before it died, she caught a glimpse of something, a shadow shifting between the distant rocks. It wasn't distinct, just a hazy outline, but the feeling of being watched was undeniable. Gabe had seen it too. He quickly switched his own flashlight back on, but there was nothing there. Julia's grip tightened around the nameplate, the icy metal sending a chill up her arm. Gabe grabbed Julia's hand and pulled her forward, quickening their pace. The damp, earthy scent grew stronger, and an icy chill crept down his spine. Their footsteps echoed in the narrow tunnel. Something was off. The sound didn't belong to just the two of them. A faint, dragging noise whispered from behind. They didn't need to turn around to know they weren't alone. The tunnel narrowed further, but the exit was finally within sight. Gabe clenched the notebook in his hands, while Julia still held the brass nameplate. It was getting colder, unnaturally so, as if it were drawing the warmth from her skin. She wanted to drop it, to let go, but her fingers wouldn't obey. The darkness behind them stirred. A deep, guttural moan rumbled through the cavern, blending with the eerie whistle of wind through the cracks in the rock. Gabe pulled Julia harder, breaking into a sprint. They lunged through the final gap, and the dim glow of the mine's entrance flickered into view. The moment they stepped outside, the air around them seemed to shatter. Julia looked down. The nameplate was gone. Gabe flipped open the notebook. The last page was blank. The numbers gone. A sudden gust of wind kicked up dust around their feet. In the distance, the old mine door groaned as it slowly shut, sealing away whatever remained inside. Gabe and Julia stood in silence, their breaths still unsteady. They had made it out, but what they had brought with them, whatever had followed, was far from gone.